Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the kind words and the introduction. What we saw before was more the look into the project cycle and details of that. Now, let me take a step back and go a little bit more into the general aspects of the financing, and let me briefly introduce the European Investment Bank. I'm sure most of you know or have a certain idea what the European Investment Bank is all about. However, we all made the experience that it is necessary to clarify a few issues. I want to do that before I go into the detail of how we finance geothermal projects. So, we are the Bank of the European Union. We are providing long-term loans. We're not providing grants. We're not subsidized, but we are, like KfW, for example, a non-profit organization. So that means we're not allowed to make significant gains. We're transferring all our benefits to the final beneficiary, to the customer. The bank was founded in 1958 by the Treaty of Rome. So that means we are a political institution. We're not a commercial bank, although we're called bank. We're owned by the 27 member states of the European Union. We're working on the basis of political mandates, which are set up by the Board of Governors, consisting of the finance ministers of the 27 member states. All our loan proposals have to be approved by the Board of Directors, which is consisting of delegates, political delegates from the member states and from the European Commission. We are located in Luxembourg, which means there is a 200-kilometer difference between Brussels and Luxembourg. We are working closely together, of course, with the European Commission. However, it has to be said and stress that we are an independent body, and that means we have to inform Brussels about the projects we're intending to finance, but the Commission does not have a veto right. Within the European Union, we can finance projects up to 50% of their project cost if the project fits one or more of the following priority objectives, which are set by the European Union. First, there are projects in convergence areas that includes tourism, healthcare, urban development, but also all kinds of private industry projects. And second are small and medium-sized companies. Here, the project purpose can be everything, almost everything. We do not finance military, tobacco, alcohol, or gambling. Third is the protection of the environment, very important for us, for the Commission, for the European Union. Fourth is research and development, that also includes education. Fifth are transport projects. We provide funding for all modes of transport, including aircraft, ships, airports, ports, railways, and motorways. And last but not least, the energy sector, very, very important for the European Union, very important for the bank. Here, especially renewable energy, such as wind and solar power, and of course, geothermal projects. Outside of Europe, we are also active. We finance projects under special mandates. So we are able to provide good and suitable projects in other countries outside of Europe with cheap interest rates and with long-term loans. So we can be active in the so-called candidate and neighborhood countries, but we are also active in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. Just a few key figures here. to show you what we did in 2011. In 2012, the figures are more or less the same. For 2012, we lent 52.2 billion. Same more or less in the partner countries. That shows that we did outside of the European Union, we did like 10 to 15% on average. But most of our loans, of course, go into the 27 member states of the European Union. We focus also on what we call the accession countries that are at the moment Croatia, Turkey, and now also Iceland. South and Eastern Europe plays an important role as well, but it is neglectable compared to what we lend to the member states. We can skip that and we come to the advantages. First of all, let me say EIB is a very small bank in terms of staffing. We're only just over 2,000 people operating worldwide. However, we are the largest supranational lender in terms of volume of loans outstanding, with more than 3 times of loans than, for example, the World Bank. So we follow our own approach, our own philosophy, which separates the EIB clearly from other commercial banks or financial institutions. And let me call this the EIB way. Our shareholders are not expecting us to pay a dividend or to earn a certain margin. And that is why we do not charge high interest rates. The benefit of our AAA rating, which results in very cheap funding on the capital markets, is transferred directly to the projects and to the final beneficiaries. So our shareholders want us to finance as many and suitable projects as possible. They want us to lend to long-term and to reliable projects. Therefore, our due diligence is a little bit special. But it is also very successful. We record less than 0.3% of failure rate within 55 years of the bank's existence. And with this excellent loan portfolio, we're able to keep this high rating, this AAA rating. And therefore, we can ensure that we get the cheapest funding rates on the capital market. So this shows that the EIB approach is prudent, and it encompasses much more than only looking at the pure financial risk of a project, but we're focusing much more on the technical aspects of a project during the appraisal process, and I will explain that in a few minutes. This is why the EIB employed about 300 sector specialists, both engineers and economists, to make sure that only state-of-the-art projects are being financed. These sector specialists operate worldwide and have a good market overview. So before working for the EIB, they worked in their respective industry and gained sufficient experience in their respective markets. Just to highlight this, to give you an example of this EIB approach. For example, when the bank decided, or the political owners of the bank decided in the early 60s that the bank should go into airport financing, we hired the director of operations from Frankfurt Airport. And he led then the team of airport financing within the EIB, because he knew exactly how an airport ticks, what the critical parameters are, and that is how we do it in every sector. So by doing so, we keep all the knowledge in-house, and we don't have to rely on external consultants. In the renewable energy sector, the EIB signed loans of more than 21 billion euro over the last 5 years. And wind energy is playing a major role here, also solar and hydropower, but also the geothermal sector is very, very important. We listed projects, individual projects in the geothermal sector from 2004 until today, totaling a loan volume of more than €1 billion. We're active within the Union, but of course we have financed a number of projects here in Iceland already. We financed projects outside of the Union, in Africa, for example, and we're continuing also to finance projects in Latin America. So, how did we finance these geothermal projects? What makes the EIB approach so special? Let us take a look at the reasons why project developers, governments, or municipalities turn to the EIB when it comes to finance these large projects. We can finance up to 50% of the project cost, as I said before. It is regardless of the amount. Large geothermal plants, or also airports, urban renewal projects, they may demand multi-million or even multi-billion loans. And the EIB can provide that, and it can do it in almost every currency, which makes the product very, very flexible. We aim at long maturities, which reflect the project's life cycles. Where commercial banks do not go beyond, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years, we look more towards 15, 20, 25 years even. And we are able to provide fixed interest rates for those long terms. So, for example, interest rates at the moment are very low. If a client comes and wants to lock in a very low fixed interest rate today for 25 years, he can do so without paying any extra cost. Our interest rates are very, very low, and they are transparent. We only add a small administrative margin on top of our cheap funding. Within Europe, that is 13 basis points. Outside of Europe, that is 25 basis points. That means 0.13% and 0.25% respectively. And that is on top of our funding rate, and our funding rate is due to the AAA rating, as I said before, slightly below or above Euribor. Also, we do not charge for political risk. We are covered by mandates from the European Commission. And very often, other banks are encouraged to participate in a financing consortium once the EIB is on board. So what we do not want to do is to crowd out other banks. We are always partnering with other banks. And that is also why we capped our participation to 50%. So there's always space and room for other banks. It's very important. Also, we do not demand a certain equity ratio, as commercial banks sometimes do. For us, it's fine to have 100% financing if it is necessary, if the project demands it. EIB loans can be provided directly, or they can be intermediated through partner banks. We have a huge worldwide network consisting of a few hundred partner banks.
Is this a slide you want to do?
Well, I had a different presentation, but it's not on this computer.
Oh, okay,
so
that's fine.
I have to apologize, because the slides I wanted to use are not on this computer. So you have to look at this boring slide over there all the time, or you have to look at me, which might be even more boring. I wanted to entertain you with totally different slides, but I just found out on the PC there are old slides, and they are not as meaningful as the content of what I'm saying. I apologize for that, but I sent a different presentation to the conference organizers.
We'll do it the old way then.
We do it the old way, exactly, yeah. So listen carefully, please. And you can, but of course you can have the actual presentation. Just drop me an email and I'll send you the actual slides with all the figures and all the content of what I was saying. I was saying that we finance projects either directly or through partner banks. Partner banks are used for smaller loans. That is below project cost of 50 million. So where we provide a loan of up to 25 million. So we want to reach small and medium-sized enterprises. We want that all companies can participate in EIB funding. That we do via partner banks. We call that global loans. However, geothermal projects, of course, are much bigger. So geothermal projects, at least the ones we financed so far, are financed directly. That means we run through a total normal EIB due diligence process. And this is what I want to tell you something about. As mentioned before, this process is a little bit different from what you are probably used to get from a normal bank. The EIB way of financing starts normally with a request from the customer, which then initiates the setup of a so-called project team consisting of a lawyer, an economist, an engineer, and a project team leader who is also responsible for the financial part and the relationship to the client. First, this team checks the eligibility of the project. That means geothermal projects are always eligible because they meet the EIB criteria for renewable energy. So geothermal can be financed worldwide. To answer the questions whether a project is financially and economically sound, we send then a questionnaire to the client, which we call the promoter. And thereby we want to find out if the planned technical concept is state-of-the-art, the techniques introduced, and if the incurred prices are competitive. For example, if a project is too expensive, we would not finance it. We also want to see an economical rate of return which is acceptable, and in the case of geothermal projects, that is 5% and above. And of course, we also check the compliance with national and international law regarding environmental protection and procurement rules. What we do not want is for the promoter to carry out extra work for EIB due diligence. We do not want the promoter to work on extra spreadsheets and stuff like that. We just want to see what the promoter is giving to others, what is already available, what they are providing other banks with, and that is perfectly fine with us. Concluding, the due diligence is a site visit. We always want to see the location, and we always want to meet with the local authorities. We do that together with the client. Normally it takes 1 or 2 days. Then we compile our reports, send them for approval to the bank's management committee and to the board of directors, which then finally approves the loan. And in the meantime, a finance contract can be negotiated and can be signed at any day after the board approval. All in all, this process takes between 4 and 6 months from receiving the first information to the board approval. That totally depends on the complexity of the project and the respective due diligence. And then a credit line is at the disposal of the client and can be used in 1 or more tranches. These tranches can be dispersed in a tailor-made way. That means according to the projects and to the client's needs. And each tranche can differ in terms of amount, currency, repayment schedule, fix a floating interest rate, etc. There's also a grace period of up to 25% of the loan term at the beginning. This credit line of up to 50% of project cost is available without commitment fee during the first 6 to 12 months. We do not charge fees like commercial banks. Everything is included in the small margin, as I mentioned earlier. If a project appraisal is becoming very complex, of course, we might add a small appraisal fee to cover additional cost or legal fees. But very often, good clients such as Reykjavik Energy or Landsvirkjun here in Iceland come back with new projects, and then, of course, there is no complex appraisal necessary. as we know the client already very well. So to sum it up, EIB is providing only one very simple product to geothermal projects, and that is a very long-term and a very cheap loan with maturities of up to 20, 25 years and interest rates just slightly above Euribor. In most of the geothermal projects we've financed so far, we teamed up with other banks, and we lent our money through those banks or shared a pool of securities with them on a so-called pari passu basis. The EIB is dedicated to the financing of renewable energy and especially to geothermal projects. We're convinced that this is the preferred way for a safe and sustainable future, and we look forward to finance this. Thank you very much for your very kind attention. Thank you.